All right, forms of governance here. There are multiple types of governance in the world, but they basically boil down to these two different categories at the national level, or at the state level, I should say. You have federal and unitary. Federal is when you have power that is shared between multiple sides, and unitary is when basically the national government says, or the state government says, hey, you're going to do this. So the federal government is going to share power. Now, this is obviously the United States, where you're going to have the United States. And then Minnesota has power, and then the local governments have power, etc. So, like, one thing I found interesting just with thing about education and education funding, that primarily comes from the state. So while the federal government might have some say, mostly any educational decision is going to be made at the state or even further down at the local level with things like school districts, which gets at here. There are so many different examples of local governments, like city governments, which is municipalities, school districts, regional planning commissions. This would be like the Met Council in Minnesota, where the Met Council is basically the council of the 7-county metropolitan area. Cities and sub-state governments are all examples of local government. So let's look at, this is federal, so it's a power sharing model. That if the federal government says something and the state says, and are in the United States, if the federal government says something and the state says something, the state does not always have to listen, because some things are state issues. So the federal system, so unitary in blue, federal in green, and it's a little more complex than this, so I'll get to that in a second. But I mean, the United States is definitely green. But you can see here, there really isn't a developmental standard with this. So, like, I mean, most of Europe is more unitary in nature. But you have if you think about this, I look at it this way: the more diverse a country is, the more likely it is to be federal. Why? You see more of the local issues culturally handled by the local governments. And so it's a little more hands-on, local in that way. Now, there's also I think this is one's a little bit better. So federal is still red up there, and then unitary countries with autonomous regions, like Greenland lets Denmark be autonomous. The UK has all their areas that are autonomous. China has some autonomous regions. This is where Taiwan comes into play. This is where the Uyghurs come into play. It's where Tibet comes into play. And then it has the ones down here without autonomous regions. And so the unitary ones down here in this bottom category, this blue one, what they're going to have is they're still going to have the national government and they're still going to have local governors, but the local ones are basically just carrying out the policies that the national government has in place. So there's no sovereign powers. It's all standardizations coming just from the leaders. And so, like, France is a major exception to this. Although France has created some autonomous regions now in the south, it's the Basques are more there, but the unitary, and so that's the main autonomous region within France. But what you have here is that their job is just to carry out whatever the national government wants. So the national government has way more power in that kind of setting. Now, lastly, within these autonomous regions here, so think of it this way: it's unitary everywhere there isn't an autonomous region. Let me give Denmark and Greenland's a really easy one here. Denmark, it's a unitary within Denmark. Foreign power, not foreign power, sorry. When Greenland is dealing domestically, Greenland, you can do what you want. It's an autonomous region, but then internationally it's not. So that's a really good example of just like, hey, domestically, it's yours. You're an autonomous region, but internationally you're not. And that's very similar to what we see in almost all autonomous regions throughout the world. You should know the differences between the two and how they and why the government originally was decided to go one way or the other.